Do you have clarity? Are you intentional? Can you see the opportunity in front of you? Today's guest is Tom Sylvester, and we're going to talk about living the ultimate lifestyle. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. We have a new Facebook group for Richer Soul. However, I forgot to tell people, if you want to connect with other listeners or me, please join us. Today, I want to focus on money and how we sometimes get suckered by advertising with regards to average returns versus compound returns. Average returns are what are advertised to us, while compound returns is what we actually get. I'm going to use an exaggerated example. Let's say you invest $10,000 and the first year you get 100% return. You now have $20,000. The next year you lose 50%. You're now back to $10,000, which is what we started with. Your average return is the 100% minus the 50%, which we lost, which equals 50%. And of course, it was 2 years, so we divide by 2, and that provides us with an average return of 25%, which is pretty impressive. But as you remembered, we were back to where we started. Our real compound return is 0. This is why you have to be careful when you evaluate returns that are advertised to you. This is going to be important when we talk about our freedom numbers and our dream numbers later in this episode and how we do the math to see how we'll get there. Remember, you need a lot more gain to make up for a loss, as you saw in the example. We need 100% growth to make up for a 50% loss. As we sit in highs in both the stock and bond markets, you want to determine how you're going to prevent a large loss and how you're going to mitigate your risks. I'm excited to have Tom on the show, and we recently got to meet up in person at a podcasting conference. There were quite a few of my friends and some of our past guests in attendance. Tom is a great husband, father, and entrepreneur. He helps people build their businesses, and we'll chat about that today. He started with real estate, followed by a wine and liquor store, and finally a coaching business. Tom and his wife, Ariana, who I also got to spend time with, spend the majority of their time helping entrepreneurs with families start and scale businesses to enable them to achieve financial freedom and live their ultimate life. Welcome to Richer Soul, Tom. It's great to have you join us today.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
It's all my honor. So we always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, growing up, I had two younger siblings, and then my parents both worked. And while they were working, my father always had kind of that side hustle before everyone kind of talked about side hustles. And so at one point, we actually built an addition on our house, and he opened a daycare there so that my mother could stay home, run the daycare, and basically have that as a stream of income so she could be home while she was raising us. So it was interesting because I kind of saw both of them working, and then I saw a little bit of the evolution into, really being an entrepreneur and kind of running your own business, and some of the challenges that came up along the way with that. So if I look at kind of my path forward from there, I always had kind of the same thing, like whether it was like collecting cans and returning those for money, or later on we would play, like I'd invite a bunch of friends over to play paintball. And I realized that I could go buy paintballs in bulk, split them up into smaller quantities, sell them and make a profit. So I kind of always had some sort of like side hustle going on to make money. That especially became clear. My parents got divorced when I was 12. So at that point, I ended up kind of bouncing around between living with both parents, eventually lived with my mom, who was now a single mother trying to raise three kids. And my father had always been the one to handle the money. So single mother, three kids, it became a big challenge for her to now figure out, like, how do I, raise these three kids as well as kind of manage money, which is something I've never done before. That forced me early on to say, all right, well, I'm going to go out, make money on my own and start taking care of myself so I can take a little bit of pressure off of her. That's really where I think a lot of my money habits came from. The big thing there was I saw her get into a lot of debt. I saw the stress that came on from that. Those kind of stuck with me to really say, I never wanted to get in debt. And then ironically, a couple of years later, my wife and I got into a whole bunch of debt and we had to kind of work ourselves out.
That's an interesting story. It's surprising that you say your dad built onto the house and built a daycare so your mom could stay home. It's funny how often people think the one spouse wants to stay home with the kids, and yet they don't even consider taking in one or two other kids to watch, because it really helps to take the edge off living-wise, and you don't have to build the whole daycare. You can just take care of one or two kids without adding much to your expense load. And these days, quality daycare is extremely expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because as we get fast forward into a little bit more of what we've done, I kind of went down the same path. I said, well, we're going to build these incomes up so that my wife could stay home, only to find out kind of years later that she really didn't want to stay home and kind of be that stay-at-home mom. So I think it's always important to really talk about and think about what it is we want out of life before we just make assumptions and move forward from there.
That right there, I think, is the nugget, because I think too often people don't have these conversations and they don't actually think of what they want out of life. Or sometimes we think we want X until we get there and we realize that's not what we wanted. And hopefully we're not in a situation that we're stuck and we can make a change at that point. So that varies dramatically. It's also interesting that because you had to struggle as a kid, that gives you kind of the force or the power to step up and to take control and make changes. That's one of the things I've learned. Too often when we indulge our kids and we give them everything, it kind of takes away their ability to step up and succeed. And it's kind of counterintuitive to that. We think we're doing right, but more often than not, we may not be doing right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one thing. So we have two children. We have a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. I was always very intentional about thinking about what kind of, father I wanted to be, what kind of parents we wanted to be, and how we wanted to raise them. I took a lot of inspiration from the great leaders in my life, in the businesses that I've been able to work with. And what I found was, for me, like one of the questions that always comes up is, Tom, if you could go back and change something in your life, what would that be? My response is, even though I had a ton of challenges and some really tough times, I wouldn't change any of it, because it's all of those challenges that I had to overcome that allow me to now be an entrepreneur that runs 3 businesses, be married to my wife. We're celebrating 10 years of marriage this year. To have these 2 kids, it's all of those things that got me to this point. And I would really be scared that if I took away one of those challenges, I might not have been able to develop the character or develop the habits or develop the perseverance to go out and be an entrepreneur and to build this life that we have now.
Absolutely. We learn in our struggles, and we have to embrace that journey of the struggle. If we try to take the easy way to the top, more often than not, we don't know how to handle the struggle that occurs when we get there. In a sense, having the struggles is good luck because it makes us stronger and it makes us better able to handle these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a pretty cool office setup. Like I made sure that when I started working kind of full-time in entrepreneurship, that I set up my environment to support me. And I've got 3 monitors, and I've got a quick saying on each one of them. The first one is embrace the suck. This is a military kind of saying where they basically say, there's going to be sucky points as we go throughout this, but embrace that because on the other side of that is something really good. And it's something that we've all got to figure out how to push through and persevere with. The second one is then keep moving forward. So it's like after you embrace the suck, whatever happens, reflect on it, but keep moving forward. Don't let that stop you. And then the third one is people need you. I think sometimes when we get stuck or when challenges come up, we'll sometimes kind of wallow in our own self-doubt or insecurities. But what I found is that reframes me back to, Tom, it's not about you. It's about your family needing you. It's about your clients needing you. And it's about people out there that need what you have to offer. And you can't be selfish by letting the fears and concerns that you have stop you from helping those people.
That's some excellent advice. And I guess people talk about this, and I think sometimes we struggle. You've got these 3 things up on your monitor to constantly remind you of that. Does it really help, or is it just kind of like a platitude of sayings up there?
That's a really good question. What I find a lot of times is that people see someone else doing something and it helping them, and they kind of copy the tactic without understanding the strategy or what goes behind it. So to me, I didn't just kind of come across those 3 things. Each of those kind of came up at a pivotal point in my life. They go a lot deeper than just what those words mean. For me, what they do is to remind me of why I'm doing things and kind of recenter me onto what's important. For example, I started off my corporate career as a software developer and eventually ended up getting into like leadership consulting where I was doing business strategy with these executives that were more than twice my age. And oftentimes they had kids that were older than me or my age. So I had a lot of self-doubt on who am I to be helping these leaders become better leaders when they have kids that are older than me. So I had a mentor at that time reframe it for me and basically say, Tom, it's not about you. It's about if you have the ability to help them, it doesn't matter how old you are or any of these other things. And he said, people need you. So at that point, I call it letting go of my ego. I got rid of, I don't care if I ask a dumb question. If it needs to be asked, I'll take the blunt of sounding dumb in order to get to the better solution. I don't care if I have to give the tough feedback and maybe that person doesn't like me because I'm doing it to get them to where they want to be. So each one of those quotes for me is deep and it realigns me back to my purpose. But if someone else was to just take those, put them up on the monitor and read them, it wouldn't have nearly the same effect. Everyone's got to figure out what it is that really triggers them.
And so that kind of comes back to knowing your why.
Absolutely. That's another thing that I think people will always say that, like, well, go back to your why. And what I found a lot of times is that people just scratch the surface with some of these concepts. And knowing your why isn't something that you sit down, you jot down in a half hour, put it up on the wall, and that's it. It's a deep kind of self-reflection thing. It's an ongoing thing. And what I've found is that usually your overall why doesn't really change a ton throughout your life. But what's important and kind of how that why shows itself is different as you go through life's journey. My kind of 2 overarching whys. 1, I want to build an amazing life for our family that allows us to do what we want when we want. And then the second one is I want to help as many people as possible. Now for us, that's kind of focused in over the years on helping as many families build businesses that allow them to create their ideal lifestyle. But those 2 kind of core whys have always been there, but it took time to really figure out why that was important and to really realize that that is really what drives me and makes me happy.
And I think that's the thing. It isn't an overnight kind of solution. It can take people months, years to figure out their why. As you work with people, do you help them figure it out? And if so, how do you kind of go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a lot of people come to us for help with business. So they're either looking to start a business and they want to kind of figure out the steps to take, or more often they've got an established business and they're trying to grow and they realize that they need to grow as a leader to be able to be the person to build this business. Or they've got to get some help kind of building the teams and systems and structures to support that scale. But whenever they come to us, we always start back with their personal life, what their why is, what their habits are, what their motivations are. Because once you understand that, and once people raise the awareness and have more clarity about themselves, they can then show up better for the people in their lives and the people in their businesses. So a lot of that, what I found, comes from really deep questioning and trying to understand not just what people say their why is, but looking back at experiences that were important to them and understanding, what was it they took from there that kind of shaped their perspective. And then obviously, like Simon Sinek has a really good book, Start With Why, and then a follow-up book from there. So I always recommend people read those to, one, understand the importance of it, but then two, the follow-up book actually has some really good, basically, strategies to help you kind of narrow that down and clarify.
What was the follow-up book?
I think it's Find Your Why.
Okay. It was from him as well.
Yeah, that one was, I think, him and a co-author.
Okay. I know the first one. I hadn't heard of the second one, I think.
And the nice thing about the second one, the first one, to be honest, I love the concept. The book was really long, and if you watch his TED Talk, you probably get everything you need. But the second one's a lot more actionable, and that's what a lot of people, I think, complained about with the first book, is it's like, okay, I get it, but now how do I actually find my why?
And I actually used someone else's book. It was Michael Hyatt. And it was more about building your life plan. And it went through each area of your life and helped you figure out what is it you want in relationships, health, work, giving back, meaning, and all of those types of things. And I think for the audience, figure out what works for you and find a way to do it, but figure out your why. I found very few people have actually done this. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. Most of the stuff that actually drives people forward, people ignore because it seems like either the soft stuff or they don't think they're going to get an immediate benefit from it. So like a big part of the activity we take people through is first focus on you or your family. Like most people have heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's a follow-up book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. And one of the things they talk about there is kind of using the same principles but applying it to your family. So we use those 2 books and those principles to say, what is your family's mission statement? What are some of the core values that you hold? What are some of like the traditions that you guys have that are important? What's your legacy? But then we also kind of shift them over, and when they kind of get clear on their why, we start talking about their life vision. So for us, what we find for most people is there's a certain amount of things we want. We want a house and a car, whatever that is. Then there's a set of experiences people want. They want to be able to go on trips or be able to do things, check their bucket list off. Then there's a set of relationships that are important to people. And then usually the big one that is often forgot about is the impact. This is where once you have all the other things, that's good. And you kind of get away from the what we call survive mode. But once you have enough money and you've got all of that set, it's usually shifting into this thrive mode, which you really only get there by impacting others and building and leaving that legacy. So we kind of step people through figuring all that out and then continuously refining it. Once they know what that big picture is, walking them through what we call a roadmap, which is basically working backwards to say, okay, who do you have to be today? And then what are the first set of things you got to do to put you in the direction of the vision and the life that you want to create?
I think that's really where life gets thrilling, is when you have covered your basics and you've got them all kind of humming along and you're searching more for the meaning and the giving back and kind of building that legacy. That's really where the fun begins. And that's also, I think, where the self-fulfillment begins, where you start to have ultimate confidence in yourself and your abilities and to be able to just live life. I know on your website you have one saying, which is living the ultimate lifestyle. What does living the ultimate lifestyle mean to you?
For us, and first off, I'll say it means something different to everyone. So if you guys hear what I'm saying and you like it, feel free to take it and adapt it. But what we see a lot of people end up doing is living what somebody else's lifestyle is. Like our tagline is your life, your business, your way. So our ultimate lifestyle is we have the options to basically choose what we want to do and when we want to do it. For us, one of the things we started doing this summer was we took Fridays off and we declared it Friday Family Field Trip. Basically, every Friday, we're going on like a mini vacation with our kids and taking them to all different things around New York State. So we're going to national parks, we're going to museums, we're going to historical places. And so we're just having this day where everybody else is working and we're out enjoying ourselves, we're teaching our kids, we're spending quality time with them while they're young, and we've built our life to allow that. For us, that's the first piece of it. And then the second piece is, and the times that we are working, we're helping other people and really making an impact on their life by helping them get more clear on what it is they want to achieve, and then helping them with both the personal stuff as well as the business stuff to ultimately make their ultimate lifestyle a reality.
That's a very important point. I think too often people look at somebody else's life and go, that looks cool, and they try to copy that instead of really taking the time to think through if that's their personal ultimate lifestyle. And I think that's where people get stuck, and that's where that struggle comes in, because you're living someone else's lifestyle, not yours. Even though you might think it's cool, once you get there, you realize, wow, that isn't what I thought it was going to be, and that's not exactly what I was expecting.
Yeah, and we have a really good thing that we have people do with that too. We actually got it from a friend a couple of years ago. Once you whether you create that vision board or once you think you have that ideal lifestyle laid out, look for a way to kind of go and experience that today before you get there to see if it's truly what you want. So for example, I mean, the easy thing is if there's a car you want or a house you want, if it's a car, go to a dealership and take it for a test drive. Right? And what kind of feeling do you get? Was it the feeling you expected? Does that motivate you? Or once you sit in there, are you like, you know what, I thought this was important, but now that I'm sitting here, it's cool, but it's not too much different than my car today. So that will help you kind of figure out, is that truly what you want? And then either give you more motivation to go after it or allow you to say, you know, I thought it was what I want, but let me go back and do a little bit of more kind of looking around and seeing if there's something else that's really driving me.
It's funny you say that, because I've heard some stories from guys who wanted a Ferrari, but these were guys who were big, over 6 feet tall, 6.5 feet tall, and big guys. And when they went and got in the Ferrari, they figured out they couldn't fit because the car is just not designed for them and it wasn't comfortable. And that's the thing, like you can go rent a high-end car for the day. And maybe you try that a couple times and see if it really is what's going to bring you happiness. And I understand that there are people who love cars and that is their thing. I think for most of us, though, after the first couple weeks, the excitement wears off and it just becomes normal. And we just chase this big dream and it's no longer important, which is kind of a shame.
Yeah, one example, we had a client who had this dream to move his family from the US to Barcelona. So he was just going to kind of continue building his business, do all of this, and then move in one fell swoop. And I said, well, let's think about it. How can we test this out to, one, see if this is really what you want to do? And what we came up with was, how about you take a week-long trip there? You'll experience the culture. You'll see if your business is set up to be able to run remotely. And you guys will then be able to say, yes, this is what we want to do. And again, is going to give you increased motivation to do the things you need to do. Or you're going to say, it was cool to visit and we can come back and visit anytime, but it's not really what we wanted. So there's always opportunities to test that. But most people just think about what they want and then never actually go and kind of confirm that it truly is what they want by doing it.
I agree with you. And that's especially true for young people, I think, who are going off to college or just coming out of college and expecting they want to be whatever profession, X, Y, Z. And they've never actually talked to anyone in the profession to see what it really means to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or something along those lines. And that's a shame. They go chasing a long dream and they take themselves so far down the track that when they get there, they're stuck. That is ultimately a shame. And so the same thing for parents, as you're raising your kids, don't put your kids on a track and say, this is what you should do in life, because That might be what you want them to do, but it may not be what your kids are going to ultimately end up enjoying and loving and doing. Go try experiences, and that's the most important thing. Test out your theories and see if they are true, and that's very great advice that you're giving.
I love the fact that you say that too, because, one of the challenges I see happen a lot with parents is instead of asking their kids questions and guiding them, a lot of parents end up kind of telling their kids, or whether they realize it or not, kind of forcing them into a certain worldview. I think there's a couple of challenges that come up with this. One, kids don't get the opportunity to think and kind of come up with their own ideas, and you don't prepare them for some of the challenges that come later in life where they're going to require that. So we're very big on helping our kids kind of weigh the pros and cons, try different things out, and it's ultimately up to them on what they believe about religion, what they believe about the government, what they believe about which sports they want to play or what they want to do. So we try to keep it very open and more support and encourage them from a leadership perspective as parents, rather than kind of dictating what they should or should not be doing.
I think we've done that to some extent with our kids. I think there were certain things that, especially when they were much younger, that we took for granted, but the world has changed. And one of the biggest of those is college. I think as my kids were really young, it was like, well, you're going to go to college and this is how life will be. Now we're at the point of, if you don't want to go to college, you don't have to go to college. There's so many other ways to do things. But that happened because the world dramatically changed over the last 20 years. And keeping our options open, and we've changed with it, which is cool. So you've got an interesting story. I'm going to take a step back and let you talk about that. You had a goal to retire at 35, correct?
Yep.
So can you just tell us a little bit about where that came from and your journey across there? And then we'll kind of see where you're at along that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, my wife and I met the very first day of college. We had 4 years of college, a lot of fun, a lot of good times. And she had a zoology degree. I had a computer science degree. As we were getting ready to graduate, I started looking ahead. It was really the first time I had probably done that. And I was like, you know what? I kind of like you were talking about before. I now saw what people with my degree were doing, and they were working in cubicles for 45, 50 years of their life. And I was like, I like computer science, but that's not what I signed up for. And then we started looking at my wife, and she had a zoology degree. And there were very limited jobs out there. And so I was like, that's not the life that I had planned and, that we had wanted for ourselves. So I was just kind of figuring out, like, what do I do from here? And I had a friend give me a book called The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. And I hated reading books. I did everything I could to avoid it. But he's like, trust me, read this book. It'll help you here. So I read it. And what was cool was that he basically showed you how by doing a couple of these small habits, you could become a millionaire. And I was like, I never thought I'd be able to be a millionaire because I was struggling financially. I mean, I ended up having my own apartment at 16 in high school. I had 3 jobs. So that kind of shifted my focus to like, oh, this is possible. The part I didn't like was I don't want to wait till 65 for that. So just kind of out of nowhere, I said, by 35, I want to retire. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it seems like 14, 15 years, it'll give me enough time to figure it out. But it's not too long to where I can't enjoy my life after that. And so basically, my wife's just like, okay, another one of his crazy ideas. And so I started trying to figure that out. So I started trying to invest in the stock market. And then I realized that we had no money because we just graduated college and had all this debt. I tried multi-level marketing. That wasn't a good fit. And then I saw real estate and I was like, okay, let me do this. So I proposed to my wife. I said, we're renting an apartment. What if we buy a duplex? We'll live in one half. We'll rent the other out. We'll basically pay no mortgage. And then we'll start building savings and we can continue from there. She wanted nothing to do with it. So long story short, I ended up going to a real estate investment training. I ended up spending about $7,500 on this training. I put it on 2 high interest credit cards because I didn't have that money. And I didn't have one credit card that even had enough space. And I did all of this without telling her, which, by the way, don't do that. It's not a good idea. But what that kind of forced us to do was to really sit down and say, okay, why did you do that? Obviously, this is really important and there's something deeper. Let's talk about it. And what we came out with was I kept telling her what I wanted to do. I wanted to invest in the stock market. I wanted to start a business. I didn't tell her why. And when I finally kind of had that conversation and said, it's because this is kind of the life that I see for us and our family. And these were the ways I thought we could get there. It completely changed our conversations. Now it was like, okay, let's get on the same page with our life, and then we'll figure out how we get there. We ended up starting a real estate investment company. We then eventually, a couple of years later, ended up starting a wine and liquor store. That was right around the time we had our first child. Then a couple of years later, and then my corporate path, I was kind of doing corporate consulting. So I was flying like 4 or 5 days a week to other cities. And when we kind of checked that back in against our life plan, we're like, I'm missing out on these key periods of our children's lives. That wasn't what we had talked about. So I ended up leaving a 6-figure job doing that consulting to be able to be home. And at the same time, we actually had a lot of people coming to us saying, all right, you guys are parents, you have 2 kids, you have 2 businesses, and Tom has a job. Can you help us? Like, how do you guys get it all done? I ended up taking all the skills and stuff we had acquired and shifted that towards working with entrepreneurs. And so what we've been able to do is then start a 3rd business to now help entrepreneurs start and scale their businesses. And we did that in a way that supports our life. So now my wife and I both work from home. We've been able to kind of put our life first and then squeeze our business in between. That's where we are today. We got 3 businesses, we got 2 kids, and we're just loving what we're doing.
That is really cool. So are you still going to retire at 35?
So that's an interesting question. I had a mentor a couple of years ago who basically yelled at me and he said, Tom, quit saying you're going to retire at 35. And I'm like, well, that's the goal. And he's like, listen, you're never going to retire. He's like, so stop using that word. He's like, what's going to change at 35? And I said, well, we're going to have these businesses. We're going to have our money covered and we're going to be able to do what we want. He's like, so you're going to have freedom at 35. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, use that word. He goes, because I know you and I know entrepreneurs. And when you have that freedom, you're actually going to have a bigger impact and you're going to do more, not less. And he's like, and you're going to enjoy it all along the way. Once he kind of gave me that reframe, I'm like, you're right. I'm not going to retire in the traditional sense, but what I'm going to do is basically switch from survive mode where I'm trying to make money to cover our family and build this life we want into thrive mode where it's like, all right, how do I now impact the world? How do I build that legacy? How do I help as many people as I can?
That's really cool. And I think that's one of the things that people have to realize. I think we have the wrong concept of retirement. And I think part of the reason is, well, first of all, retirement historically did not exist. It's a relatively new concept, probably in the last 100 or so years. And I think retirement was because you work so hard, you finally got a chance to sit, but you never enjoyed the journey to retirement. Everyone was waiting for that moment. But that's not the way to live life. You should enjoy that journey, enjoy your climb up to the top. To me, retirement, very much like you, retirement is the freedom to say no to whatever you choose to say no to, and the ability to say yes to whatever you choose to say yes to, and having the freedom to be able to do all of those types of things. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and that's such a good way to frame it. That's a lot of the conversation we like to have with people. Whether or not people decide to become entrepreneurs or whether they end up, staying in their job, what we always tell people is it's the same basic guidance. Like, get clear on what you want. We ask them, what would be ideal? Like, what would you like your ideal kind of everyday to be like? And they'll describe that and they'll kind of go through it. And then we ask a key question. What's stopping you from doing that now? In a lot of cases, there are certain constraints with their current life that may prevent all of it from being done. But there's usually pieces that they can start doing right now and they don't realize. They have this mental block that they got to wait till retirement. What we always tell people is it's about designing your life, designing your job or your business to support your lifestyle. If you're intentional and you know what that looks like, you can start taking steps towards that. And now it's basically a filter when you make decisions. Let's say you're in a job. If you get a new job offer, you can now use that as a filter to say, which one makes sense? Which one's going to progress me towards my goals and give me that lifestyle I want? Now, as entrepreneurs, oftentimes we actually have a lot more flexibility there because we have more control over that. Obviously, we then also have more burden on our shoulders. But I'm a believer that everybody, if they take some time to get clear on what they want, they can be a lot more intentional with the actions they do today to ultimately get them there.
Throughout this recording, you've used certain words over and over that I constantly use. And number one is clarity. Knowing what you want is clearly important. Being intentional in your decisions instead of just reacting in the moment. And I think too often people are presented something like a new job and it's like, oh, that's exciting. I make another $10,000. They don't realize that it also requires another 10 or 20 hours a week, or you have to travel, or it screws up another part of your life. They're not looking at it as it fits in with their bigger plan. And then you kept talking about how your lens was shifted, how right there in front of you are so many opportunities, and somebody helped to shift your lens so that you could see the same situation from a different viewpoint. And I think for me, that is literally the power of coaching, where somebody looks and listens to what you say and then helps to kind of turn you around so that you can see all the opportunity that's right in front of you and give you those next little steps to start moving in the path that you want to go. And that's cool that you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point. I'm glad you called those out, because those are some of the things that obviously I constantly am telling people, because everyone's looking for tactics. They're looking for like, how do I be more productive? How do I make more money? How do I do all these things? But the things that really make a difference are getting clear on what that even is, and then being intentional about the actions to get there. And then your point about coaching and seeking outside help is probably one of the biggest ones, because a lot of people will see, and I was this way for a long time. I was like, well, I built a certain level of success. If I ask for help, it undermines my success and makes me look weak. But the shift that I've had over the years that has been just so phenomenal for my growth and for being able to help more people is asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And so, we have coaches. I mean, I surround myself with just amazing people that challenge me on a daily basis. My wife and I actually go to a marriage counselor, not because our marriage is bad, but because we believe in investing our time and money into the things that are most important to us. So where a lot of people will wait, or there's a stigma where like, oh, well, don't go and get help with your marriage unless it's bad. Or if you get help, it's bad. It's like, no. This is so important to us that we want experts to help us make it even better. And I think when people can shift away from, I can invest in a coach, or it doesn't make sense to spend time there, I would say, think about what's most important and then take a look at where you're spending your time and money. And if you just make some of those shifts into the things that are more important, you're going to see a huge change in your life.
The first step to that is know where your time and money are going. I think most people have no clue where their time and money goes. At the end of the month, They go, where did my money go and how did this month go by? And I know you've talked about this as well, I think, is taking the time to just track those things. It's easier going forward than backward. Just start sitting down and figuring it out. Look at your calendar for the month and start tracking. Where is all my time going? What am I spending it on? Where is all my money going? What am I spending it on? Are these in alignment with what I truly want? Of course, you have to know what you want to figure out if you're in alignment, but all these things kind of stack together.
Absolutely. And, the first thing that we do with most people that approach us is we have them do a time audit, and we give them a template and we say, for the next week, every half hour, I want you to write down what you did. And then we help them audit it afterwards and kind of bucket time, see where it goes. And then, like you said, align that back to, or compare that against where they want to go. And oftentimes the people that are successful, it's very aligned. The people that are struggling, it's disaligned, but they don't understand it because they think in their head, oh, well, I spend my time in these certain buckets, but oftentimes they end up spending more time than they realize. And we'll often even have them put like tools on their computer, something like rescue time, that'll track that automatically. Most people spend a lot more time on social media and some of these other sites that are just kind of busy and aren't getting them to their goal. And it's like, once they realize that, now we can start figuring out what we can shift or how we want to design their ideal week to ultimately get them to that lifestyle they want and the goals that they want.
Absolutely. And one thing I've also heard you talk about is a freedom number. So what's a freedom number?
A freedom number is basically what it's going to take to get you either out of your job or out of your business so that you've got enough money coming in to cover all of your expenses, which at that point we consider you free. Because like you were talking about earlier, now you've got options and you've got really control over your time and what you do. And so that's usually the point where people start shifting from that survival mindship of, I just need to get enough to cover, into that thrive mindship. And then what we talk about there, the next number is your dream number. So now if you look at everything on your vision board, what's it going to take to make all of that a reality? And then that's the next step that we kind of guide people through. Most people, like if they say they want to leave their job, we go back and we say, okay, well, what are your expenses today? And most don't know. So we help them figure that out. And then we say, okay, so that's what it is today. When you leave your job, what is that? Because most people don't realize, oh, well, now I got to maybe cover health insurance. Now my company's not matching my retirement, so I got to put maybe money away for that. Guess what? Now I don't have sick time if I'm running my own business. I don't have vacation time unless I build that in. So your freedom number ultimately becomes your expenses today plus what your expenses are going to look like after you leave a job or after you step away from your business and hire somebody else to do some of that work.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the reality of all of this, right? So you have real estate, you have the wine and liquor store, and you have this coaching business. And you've got this 2 kids, you've got Fridays, you're running around enjoying life. As people look at that, they go, that is just so awesome. I want that. And how do I have that tomorrow? And yet, I think what they miss is that there's probably a lot of struggles and risks and things that occurred on that journey along. Would you care to share some of those?
Absolutely. I don't think we have enough time to share them all. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's people that have known us from the beginning of that journey, and they've seen a lot of those ups and downs we've gone through. And then obviously, as we get kind of more exposure, people start seeing us now. And like you said, they see that and they don't see the struggles the 10 or 11 years before to make it here. One of the major ones early on was me spending that money and without telling my wife. And she wasn't my wife at the time. We were getting married in 9 months. So that caused us not only financial issues, I mean, between college, buying a house, credit card debt, and some other just poor choices, we were over $200,000 in debt by the time we were 22. And that's a huge hole to dig out when you're just leaving college. She was bouncing around between part-time jobs, and I had kind of my entry-level job. It's a big challenge to overcome. When we became parents, that was another thing, because instead of it being about like us individually and then us together, now we've got this tiny human in the world. We've got to make sure that we're making choices for them. And where we used to have a lot of time to work on the businesses and do what we wanted, suddenly that all shifted. And when we had the second child, it was the same thing. And every time we've started businesses, I mean, if we went back and counted, we've probably lost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from poor decisions, from things we didn't know. Like, so for example, with our wine and liquor store, we got fined with illegal gambling at one point because we ran a marketing promotion and we didn't include the words "no purchase necessary" at the bottom. And so that was like a $3,000 fine that we got within the first year of us opening that business. So we've had financial challenges with every business. With our real estate business, we had tenants that didn't pay us, tenants that trashed our properties. We've had issues where we miscalculated the taxes that we owed, and suddenly we had a tax bill that was like $4,000 more than the business had, and we had to now kick in more of our own money. We've had challenges where it just got overwhelming. My wife had a little bit of postpartum depression after the second child. And with the businesses and me still traveling and the kids, it got to a couple points where it was like, is this all worth it? Should we just sell these off and kind of go back to a traditional life? And what helped us through all of that was that we had defined what we wanted and we were constantly checking in. And so by doing that and really having these open communications, we said, it's a challenge now. What do we got to do to kind of keep moving forward and make this better? And like we look back now and we chat and we're like, we're so glad that we kind of figured a lot of these things out along the way and that we persevered because we embraced the suck. It was sucky for a long time. And we kept moving forward and we realized people needed us. And through all of that, we're now where we are today, where now we can have a greater impact. But to your point, there's a lot of that never gets talked about. And especially with social media and all of that, you see like 1% of a person's life and you see the 1% they want to show you. Let me tell you, we've worked with so many businesses of all different sizes. Every business has struggles, and every leader, even if they look like the most put together, they get struggles as well.
And I agree with you. I have real estate and I am going through the suck. So I get it. It's not easy. And I think people need to realize that this is work. It takes effort, and you just have to keep showing up step after step and understand. And I think that's one of the things that happens. And maybe you see this too. I see people make one mistake. Like they get into real estate, they buy one house, things go wrong, and they give up. Do you see that happen as well?
Yeah.
How do you help that person, or how do you change the lens so that when they get stuck or when the suck is there, how do you get through it?
Yeah. One of the first things, this actually pushes a lot of people away from working with us, is I tell them that right up front. So typically when people want to start a business, they're all excited. They hear about Steve Jobs and all the stuff he did. They hear about other entrepreneurs talking about like Freedom Fridays and all this stuff. But what they don't see is that all the challenges that entrepreneurs went through. And unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs aren't sharing that stuff, so people have no idea. So we tell them that. We're like, look, this is going to be tough. And if you define this, if you put in the work, there's going to be failures. You're going to have the suck. But if you work through it, you can make this happen. And then usually there's somebody else out there saying, hey, we can help you get 6 figures in 90 days. And usually what happens is they'll go with the person that tells them it's going to be easy. And this was me years ago. I spent the $7,500 on that real estate course because I'm like, oh, if I just give this person my money, they're telling me I can flip houses and start making $40,000 and I'll more than pay for this investment. But there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more personal work that you got to do. There's a lot more that you got to learn. There's a lot of challenges. So we like to just tell people that up front. And then we like to work them through, especially when that challenge happens. All right, let's reflect. Why did that happen? All right, once we kind of have that reflection, we're going to let it go because we learned the lesson from it, but we're not going to dwell on it. And now we're going to keep moving forward. So what's up next? And if they don't know, if they think they want to quit, we kind of future pace them and we walk through a couple different scenarios. Okay, if you quit now and go back to what you were doing before, tell me what your life will look like. Tell me how you'll be feeling. And we walk through that. Okay, but what if you continue on with this path? Tell me what things will look like. So we're not necessarily telling them which path to go down, but we're helping them to think through the scenarios and then align that back to what they said was important. And then ultimately they're going to make the decision. And what we've found is that where I used to try to save everybody from making those mistakes, I've actually found that we need to let them make mistakes because it's through those mistakes that it's going to filter out people that aren't serious. And the ones that overcome that are now building the key skills to be successful as an entrepreneur. And we were talking earlier about like kids and raising kids. We found we take the same approach with them. We let them make a lot of mistakes and we reflect with them and we let them learn because we want them to grow up to be leaders and strong adults as they grow older.
And there's a key point there, right? We're not raising great kids. We're raising great adults.
Mm-hmm.
Two different outcomes. And I like to make that point a lot. So this is not a message people want to hear, right? I don't want to hear the message, well, I have to struggle and fail, and that's how I'm going to get my ultimate lifestyle that I can thrive. What % of people are willing to do that work and just keep going?
What I've found is I think most people are willing to when and if the circumstances are right. What we try to do with people, whether or not they end up working with us or not, we try to help raise their awareness and clarity. Because oftentimes what happens is that people are going through life and it's good enough. I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but I can pay my bills, so it's good enough. And they have this fear that if I make a change, I might lose some of these things that I have and be worse off. Whereas what tends to happen and what causes most people to significantly make a change is when a major event happens, a death happens, they get fired from their job, something else happens. So what we try to do is to, once again, future pace people and ask those questions and force them to not just go through their daily grind and be okay with it, but to really think about what it is they want. And sometimes by doing that, you can actually have them feel the emotions and vicariously have that experience so that they realize today that this is important and they have the intrinsic motivation to make a change. Because you cannot change anybody else, but like especially a good coach can help you have that awareness so that you can decide to make the change yourself and then start moving through. So some people go through life and never have an experience like that, or never are able to overcome their fears, and they get to the end of their life and they just look back at all the stuff they could have done and the opportunities they missed out on. There's people that later in life have that epiphany. They think it's too late, but it's never too late. And I think, like, for myself, because of all the struggles I had, and I had some key people around me, I was able to just learn so much from the people that have come before me that I knew much earlier than a lot of people that it was something that was important to me, and I was going to put in the work to make it happen.
Yeah, it's horrible to live a life and then look back with nothing but regrets. That's a shame, because at that point you can't do anything. I've always said, and I've heard the saying, the enemy of great is good. And it's that complacency. When things are good enough, we're not willing to make the big changes to allow for greatness. And it's one of those human traits, and it's what our mind does. Our mind does everything it can to keep us safe and secure, because that's its purpose, is to keep you safe and secure. It's not there to create greatness for you. Greatness kind of comes from somewhere else within, but your mind's goal, and that's why it's constantly filling you with fear, is to just kind of protect itself from those types of shifts.
Yeah, there were definitely points on our journey where we got comfortable. When you're making a really good salary and, I was flying all over, I was doing what I loved doing, which was helping people. I was helping companies and their leaders, and I'm staying in nice hotels, like nice dinners. To me, none of that stuff mattered, and it wasn't what ultimately makes me happy. And when I ended up leaving that job, most people around me were like, what's wrong with you? Like, are you going through a midlife crisis at like 30? And they're like, I don't understand. How could you work so hard and then walk away from a 6-figure job? And I'm like, listen, it was never about the 6-figure job. It was about, once again, building this life for our family, having options, and impacting others. And if people don't have something bigger than themselves, they oftentimes look at fear and they let it hold them back. Whereas another reframe a mentor gave me years ago is, he said, fear is just telling you to pay attention. Fear is telling you that this is something important. How you decide to react and act is completely up to you. But most people just automatically assume fear, bad things, stay away. Where if a tiger is chasing you, yes, fear is a bad thing, stay away, run. But in most cases, we're afraid of something that may never actually happen. Or the chance of it happening is so less that it's like, are we really going to let something that has a 1% chance of happening stop us from going after something that has a 99% chance of happening? So some of those reframes and just talking to people and hearing their journeys oftentimes will help you with that.
And I think I've heard the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real.
Mm-hmm. It's such a good acronym.
And that's the problem, though, is having authentic conversations and having people actually hear you and listen to you and not necessarily give you advice, but let you see, as you talk about, where you're always showing them different paths to the future. And that was what Scrooge was all about, right? They said, here are your different paths in life. Figure out which one you want to follow. And I think that's a big part of it is not that. I think too often people are looking for someone to tell them what to do, and that's not going to solve their problem. You need to find someone who will actually sit down with you, listen to you, show you different paths, and let you explore those options, which is exactly what you're doing, and then let you figure out for yourself which is the path you want to take, and understand that in order to take this path, this is the work you have to do. And as you said, embrace the suck. It is the work you have to do, and enjoy that journey as you're taking it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, and I had to learn this, was my why was to help all those people. And so what I started doing early on was just like going and trying to solve people's problems. And one of the things I had to figure out was, one, not everyone necessarily wants their problem solved.
What % of people actually want their problem solved?
That's a good question. I would say not as many as we think.
I think the number is single digits.
I agree. And, when I was out trying to help people, like there's another saying that someone said to me a couple years ago, you need to be somebody's leader, not their savior. And that completely shifted things for me, because what I realized I was doing was I was trying to go and save all these people from making mistakes and from what I thought were mistakes. And what I had to realize was that I really needed to be a leader, and I needed to be able to ask those questions and give those options. And then it was up to them on whether they stepped forward with that or not. And, I think far too often people with good intentions, coaches, etc., might step into the path of directly solving the problem or giving advice rather than kind of teaching or helping somebody work through that so they understand how to think and how to solve it on their own. And they prove that they're willing to go through some of that work to get what's coming on the other side.
And I think that's the thing, is most people aren't, we keep coming back to that. Most people aren't willing to do the work. But if you're willing to do the work, it's not a lifetime of work. I mean, you're only talking about 12 years in your case, roughly, and you paid off hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. You've got young kids and you're living the life of your choice. And that's amazing.
Yeah. And, there's some people that have done it much faster than us. And to them, I applaud them. Kudos. That's awesome. I want to learn from you. And there's some people that have taken a longer time. And neither is better or worse. Like we talked about earlier, it's figuring out what your roadmap is and what your time frame is and how it all fits together, and then just work on that.
Absolutely. And so I want to hit one last topic here, which is delegating work. Because as an entrepreneur, that's a big part of what you have to do. And I think a lot of people struggle with delegating work.
Yeah. In working with a lot of leaders, whether it's Fortune 500 companies or solopreneurs, I think that's one of the bigger challenges, especially for entrepreneurs. What tends to happen is you start this business and you've got such a passion around it and you've got this vision. And as the business grows, what most people look for is like business strategies and the business guidance. But what they don't realize is that they've got to continuously level up to then be able to lead that business. And oftentimes when people tell me that they can't delegate, usually it's because they don't have clarity around what it is that they do, they're good at, how processes form, or to be honest, how their business is even running. Unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs that struggle don't understand how to read their financial statements. They're afraid of the numbers, likely because they never set budgets and were financially fit in their personal life. So that's what we got to work on. And they think that they're the only one that can do a process because it's in their head and they do it differently every time. Well, guess what? You are the only one that can then do it. But what we help people to do is figure out, like that time audit, it all comes back to that. Figure out where their time's spent. Figure out if they continue on this path, are they going to achieve their goals? Usually not. So we figure out where the gap is. And then we start asking questions. All right, how do we close this gap? What if we did this? What if you did that? By doing that, we can then start to identify what are the things that we can start to put a process and a system around, get that documented, test it out, make it work, and then get that off of your plate because you don't enjoy doing it, or it's very low value, or it's not something you should be doing anyways. And then that frees them up to focus on what's more valuable and what they typically enjoy doing, and it lets somebody else usually do that better. So like, for example, with our wine and liquor store, when we first started, we were doing everything. And then we slowly started hiring people in and kind of delegating tasks off. But one task that my wife just kept holding on to was ordering the alcohol. And the ironic part of this was she really doesn't drink that much alcohol. So she wasn't physically at the store. She doesn't actually consume alcohol. She wasn't talking to our customers. She hated doing the ordering, yet she held on to that because she had this fear of kind of letting it go. Now, fast forward, we hired a person who loved alcohol, loved going to events, tasted all sorts of stuff, just like in his free time would dive into this. He's made our store more profitable. We spend a lot less time, and he does it way better than us. So we had to just kind of work through what it was that was holding her fear back and then deal with those things, which was putting a process in place, letting her kind of see that it wasn't something she liked to do. But that's ultimately what it comes down to is what do things need to look like to get to where you want to be? What is enabling you to get there? And then what's a barrier or holding you back? And then we start attacking those barriers and just start breaking them down to get them off of your plate and onto somebody else's so you can really focus on where you add the most value.
You've said that all in probably under 2 minutes. We actually have full episodes talking about focusing on your numbers as a small business and in creating systems as a person or an entrepreneur, because those two topics right there go quite deep. And if they aren't what you want to do, that's fine, but put the processes and the people in place, because at the end of the day, whether it's personal or business, you're trading your time for money. You need to be focused on the money. And the way you get your time back is by creating systems so that you don't have to do the same things over and over again, and especially the things that you hate doing. So we've got much more in depth on both of those topics.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Let me give a quick tip just for anyone that's struggling and wants to get started with this. So we have a weekly meeting where part of the agenda is what wins did you have and what challenges did you have. Do that. Take a look at challenges for the week. Pick one challenge and then set an intention to create a basic process for that in the upcoming week. Couple things for this. It's going to immediately address something that's causing you stress or a challenge in your business, so it's going to free up some of that. And then two, it doesn't take a ton of time to put your first process together, but if you're consistently doing this every week over the course of a year, it makes a huge impact. And when you're putting a process together, here's a starting point. What is the trigger? What's going to start this process coming? Is it a day of the month? Is it a certain action happening? What are the 3 to 5 major steps that are required for this process? And then what's the finalization? How do you know that this process is done? So if you can just start doing that for the different challenges you have, it's going to give you a great starting point to then be able to further build these out, optimize them, and then get them delegated.
And I'm going to expand on that to say, you don't have to have a business to do this. I mean, you can just be a family, and your struggle this week is getting your kids out the door and onto the bus every morning for school. That's fine. If that's your struggle, it's the same exact principles apply. Figure out what causes the struggle and what processes and things can you put in place so that your kids leave in the morning in a great mood and you don't have to struggle through it. It doesn't matter, business or personal, the principles are always the same. So wherever you are, it's good. Is there anything that I've missed today? Is there something we should have hit upon that I did not get to?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm hoping that the listeners really go back and take a second look through, because I think we actually hit on a lot of topics and a lot of deep topics that are really important, but you're maybe not going to get the first time through because it does take some time to go through. So I think this is a really good episode.
It is. And we've had many episodes like this. And what's really cool is you're hearing people in all different places talk about the same principles and how they apply to their specific situation. The principles are the same, but their lives are entirely different. And yet we come back to the same place at the end of every conversation. So based on our conversation today, what's one action step that people can take to move forward this week?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love action. So based on this conversation, what I'm going to recommend most people do is allocate some time and then go back and really start thinking about your why and what you want your life to look like. And once you get done with that, start really thinking about where are you at today and what's the gap. Because once you have clarity around some of that, that's where you can now start putting plans in place to start taking action. Actually, what we can do is we can give you a couple of the templates that we use with our coaching clients when we take them through this activity.
That would be cool. How would they find those?
So you guys can go to tomandariana.com. Actually, if you reach out to me on there, we'll shoot you over a copy.
All right.
If you guys go on the website, it has, everything we offer is kind of our central hub. So it's got our podcast, our courses, a lot of the content that we put out to help entrepreneurs and people building their ideal life.
Cool. And I will put the website in the show notes and make sure that it's easy for people to find and connect with you. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom. It's been a pleasure to have this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine.
I really enjoyed today's discussion with Tom. We covered so many great nuggets. He has a special link for you if you want to learn more. It's tomandariana.com/RS. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can just click on it. Today's action step: determine what's your why. Figure out where you are today and what's the gap between that and where you want to be. Isn't it amazing that they went from $200,000 in debt to the life of their dreams in such a short period of time? Now they basically do what Warren Buffett says: tap dance your way to work. But remember, we have to embrace the suck. And as Tony Robbins says, you dance with that emotion pulling you instead of fighting against it. Look forward to going back to another event this fall with him. And my wife is currently in Amsterdam at one of his other programs. Can't wait to see what revelations she has to come away with. I know climbing up a 40-foot pole and letting go has to be scary. Did you enjoy today's episode? Please share it with friends and family. Once again, we heard that so few people take action. What about you? What are you going to do? You can reach me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I have shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.